It's Wednesday, the 26th of November 2014, and this is Ecotastic. My name's Robin Yellow, and with me is the Ecotastic Kit Knowles.
Hello, everybody. I like that
Things,
introduction.
Kit. How you
That's an
getting on this week?
improvement.
I notice you're wearing a big roll neck top there. Is it cold and chilly in the wilds of the north of England?
In the wilds of North, it is chilly outside, and I've been outside on site most of today on a extremely exciting yet absolutely nutty. Have you ever had those clients that they don't really care a great deal about logic? That doesn't factor in any part of their decision making. It's simply kind of a random selection of wants and wills that suits them and their wives' lives, and expect anybody around them to kind of piece this craziness together. That's basically where I'm at.
That's my kind of client. The more they want, the more random they are, the more they can be exploited.
I'm not going to claim the exploitation side of things, simply that it's making for a very interesting project.
Well, absolutely not. And of course, I don't mean that.
I love it. Backing out. It's so good, Robin.
Backing out.
You're just a decent
my convictions, shouldn't I? Yeah, absolutely.
lovely
Okay,
guy.
well,
Lovely guy.
all right. Well, let's start with the news. And the first article we're looking at this week is from The Guardian, talking about 10 things you need to know about sustainable palm oil. Now, palm oil apparently is in half of the products we buy, but the impacts of unsustainable production can be devastating. Now, The Guardian held a panel of experts, or got a panel of experts together to look at ways to build a more sustainable palm industry. And a couple of the points that they brought up were to do with the fact that education, both in the eyes of consumers and in people who make stuff from palm oil, will help drive wiser choices in palm oil. Now, why is palm oil production so unsustainable, Kit?
So the big issue with palm oil, I'd say the number one issue is the fact that it's not a very dense form of energy, and it's being used for an energy source. I think the biggest ballooning the industry was when we wanted to use palm oil as part of the biofuels side of things, when a few of the big oil companies were kind of using that to filter into their biofuels elements. And so the first thing that came out of the studies that they were running was that just like in Brazil, where the jungle is being chopped down to be replaced with fields to raise cattle and areas to raise cattle on, in Indonesia and other areas of Asia, they were chopping down jungle to make way for specific types of palms to manufacture palm oil from. So the biggest issue is land and destruction of habitat, as far as I believe.
All right, and of course this photo here is forests that have been burnt down to put these palm oil plants into.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't look particularly jungle-like around there, so I have no idea what they removed or not. But then this is about sustainable palm oil production, and obviously the growth of a particular crop can always be done in more sustainable ways. So I'm hoping that this article is giving some ideas of well, you're saying here consumers should not boycott palm oil. I think as with most issues that you have, it's where you put all your eggs in one basket, right? So with energy, focusing on the generation of one type of energy, it's always a very kind of high school approach. You've got to think about a mix. And I think that why palm oil, more than any other form of oil, has to be used in a lot of these products, I doubt that's the case. I'm sure engineers food engineers can work out a way to sort of factor in or blend in other forms of oil, which would enable you to alleviate any of the specific issues associated with palm oil, wouldn't you say?
Well, I would, and the debate's going to rage on palm oil. I must admit I'm not terribly well educated on it. I should go and read that article in more depth after the show. Our next article is from building.co.uk. Government props up Green Deal loan firm. Now, we've talked about the Green Deal before, but the government has just agreed this week to plough a $34 million loan into the Green Deal finance company to keep it trading next year. Now, as we've reported before, the government has given credit facilities to the Green Investment Bank, totaling £125 million, which is due to expire soon. Is the Green Deal in jeopardy? Is it on its way out, Kit?
I think it possibly will leave with the Conservatives, actually, if it goes that way, on the basis that, I mean, I don't know, it will certainly have to change, because it came in, it needed 60,000 houses a year to sign on, and it got something like 1,400 in its first year. So, sorry, 4,000. It really isn't going anywhere near as well as they planned. They are getting further and further in debt, the company that's running it. So the whole, which I kind of like the irony of, on the basis that the whole scheme is a debt-based scheme. So I'm not sure it's gonna fly in the long term. I think it was always it's a pretty dangerous thing when you take a society that suffers from debt-based issues and make the solution to a lot of their biggest issues to get themselves in more debt in one way or other. I'm not sure that's the solution.
No, it usually isn't, is it? And in fact, a lot of the financial woes that we had over the last 5 or 6 years are due to a debt-fueled economy, as you say, and I know that you feel strongly about that. Let's move on. Talking of debts, the Tories and the government, Caroline Flint visited Cambridge clean tech firms last week, and she attended a roundtable to provide opportunities for members of the clean tech community to hear more about Labour's plans to undertake the biggest reform of the energy market since privatisation, and the chance to articulate their ideas and business needs to help the clean tech sector flourish. Why is the clean tech sector so important, Kit, and will it flourish under Labour?
The latter question, I really don't know. Political cycles generally being just around the sort of 4 or 5 years is not enough to usually push anything forward. Having said that, if from a clean tech perspective, the big issue that I have with clean tech is it's generally a slap-on solution that very rarely integrates well with what's there existing. So I think clean tech needs to be synonymous with sort of integration engineering before I believe it's a big solution. I think economists are relying upon engineers and scientists to come up with solutions in terms of either substitutions or improvements in efficiencies in all ways to get us through all of our different issues, revolving around sustainability. So I think when you're looking at clean tech, you've got to be bearing in mind that this political cycle generally is too short to enable people to take things from start to finish, run the full length. So I think I'd be interested to know what Labour will be doing to enable clean tech to run forward, and also how I see clean tech being put up on a pedestal and made the way to be going in terms of solving sustainability issues. I think that's also pretty dangerous. I think there needs to be more fundamental changes made with the sort of the democracy and economic side of things. In terms of prosperity without growth would be something I'd like to see us moving towards as a society.
Interesting. And we've got one final article of news before we get into Kit's Tech Corner. But certainly we've got, another, I'm going to say 6-7 months before the election, so there's going to be plenty of, you know how I love politics, Kit, there's going to be more political news, hopefully, on Ecotastic in the coming months. Next and final news article is from The Guardian. Guardian Sustainable Business subsection, 7 tips for a healthier and more sustainable Thanksgiving. Now, for Americans who are listening and watching this, of course, you'll be celebrating Thanksgiving, and we've kind of picked it up in this country too. A lot of people, including myself, know Americans, and actually I've been invited to a Thanksgiving thing on Saturday. Technically it's not Thanksgiving, which is Thursday, but who wants to interrupt a good work week for the sake of a turkey? But they give some tips here about how you can be more green and sustainable when you're having a Thanksgiving dinner. And one of the bits of advice they give is about skipping the turkey. And they say the only way that you can produce 46 million turkeys to be consumed on one day is to factory farm them. And that means overuse of antibiotics, turkey waste, runoff, and animal cruelty galore. And then, of course, we do it all over again on the 25th of December when we eat turkey all over again. So a lot of turkeys, a lot of concentrated consumption of a particular animal, Kit. Doesn't sound terribly green and sustainable to me.
I think a lot of the fowl, the turkeys, chickens, etc., they really are buoyed up with antibiotics and sort of hormone therapies that are having quite significant knock-on effects. Actually, I haven't got the sources to ratify this, but some pretty scary statistics I was hearing the other day with regards to water, particularly in London, actually, where I was hearing that by the time you take a sip of water, the water molecules that are going into your body have been through approximately 8 people before you. That's one statistic. Another statistic is that the way that water is treated is with sort of biological action. So they use oxygen in water with a particular cocktail of bacteria to break things down and clean it. But the thing that, I mean, that cleanses almost everything along with other filters and flocculations and other bits and bobs. You get a massively clean and pure water coming out the other end, which is great. However, I heard that there are 2 things that can slip the net, and I didn't really understand one, so I'm not going to talk about it, but hormones and maybe antibiotics, but again, I don't see that happening, but hormones for sure being one that's slipping the net. So a lot of these fowl that are being putting on a lot more weight a lot quicker and being able to be more intensively farmed without getting ill and dying off, all these sorts of ways that the farmers are kind of going, it's actually getting into the water and staying in the water for much longer than you might think, which I think is kind of scary. I wouldn't like to be taking chicken hormones myself.
Oh, that explains my moobs.
My boobs. Yeah, nothing to do with diet, and I wouldn't say the old age. No.
It's not the hormones; it's the amount of turkey I'm eating.
Yeah, you should skip the Thanksgiving. That's another hint there.
Indeed. Well, look, if you're revving up for a Thanksgiving dinner, I hope you enjoy it and have a great time. But think about the poor turkey, and then perhaps we'll all be safe from.
What are the alternatives? Goose or?
Well, I don't know why Thanksgiving particularly, and indeed I think before the Americans colonized Christmas, we used to have goose, like the Germans, for example, who have goose, don't they? We only have turkey, I think, in the UK because of the Americans, and Santa Claus is in a red outfit because of Coca-Cola, and I think pretty much, the Christmas celebration is a sort of poor cousin of Thanksgiving in the United States, but we pretty much do it the way the Americans did. So, turkey is a native North American animal, of course. We don't get turkeys in Europe natively, so what do I know? So that's the news. Thank you very much for that, Kit. And we'll now move. We've got one thing to talk about in Kit's Tech Corner this week. We're going to have a chat about Passive House.
Yeah, Passive House, the German golden standard. I think it's going to be quite an interesting technology to run through, because we've got a guest for next week, haven't we? Who's actually built one of these and is living in one of these. Is that right, Robin?
That's correct. We've got John Draper joining us next Tuesday, who has just completed a Passive House. So I thought we'd do a little primer of Passive House this week. I know we've talked about it on previous shows. But let's have a look at it. I'll flip through the site. Kit, you tell us a few interesting facts about Passive House. I mean, Would it be naive for me to say that Passive House is just high building standards, triple glazing, everything sealed up like a drum, heat, ventilation, and moisture recovery and circulation systems, low temperature heating systems, underfloor or radiators, that sort of thing?
Well, firstly, actually, what you're talking about there is quite a lot, and there's a lot that goes into it. But I think the main point around Passive House was 2 things. The one is that the whole kind of origin of it was to understand sort of how good we need to get at retaining energy to enable us to get away without having to put energy into our house in the first place. So, literally living from the incidental gains of elements in your house, like ovens and cookers and people. Each of us are 100 watts radiator. So they have sort of reverse engineered from this point by saying we need to, look, it says there, heating demand of passive house buildings needs to be less than 15 kilowatt hours per square meter per year. So they basically said that 15 kilowatt hours per square meter per year, if you can build a property that has less than that loss, then you basically can get away without having to have a heating system, which was the whole idea. And the reality is that it works. There's plenty of them around. It is a very tough standard to meet, and I think one of the elements around this standard that I don't find in a lot of other standards is it's well integrated, it's well thought about. What they are doing is making sure that you're coming at it from every perspective. I had somebody who was into hi-fi the other day, and I tried to use that as a metaphor, so I don't know if this works with you, but there's no point having the absolute all-singing, all-dancing CD player and a great amplifier, but have absolutely rubbish speakers and connect it all up with kind of a toothpick wire. The logic is you need to bring everything up on par to maintain high standards. So in the building industry, I think that way too often you take, a plethora of low standards and then sort of slap one shiny, sexy technology onto it and say, hey, presto, we're eco or whatever. This is not what Passive House is about. Passive House has a mantra. It's build tight, ventilate right. And that mantra is a very solid mantra. It's something I live by. It's something that I really have done. I mean, basically what my life's work's been around for the last 5 years is focusing on transferring passive house principles into existing dwellings, into retrofitting dwellings. So I am not trying to achieve getting houses without heating systems in the main, but I am trying to use the methods or the methodologies that they use to achieve massive reductions in energy consumption. It really is the kind of ultimate of a fabric first construction.
Well, do you know, I mean, everybody likes to save money, and one of the things that it was saying in the Passive House notes there was reusing and capturing, as you said, the heat that is produced by your life, rather than having to use excess heat, which just drains out the walls and up the chimney. A byproduct of that is as the cost of energy goes up, then your investment returns more than it did perhaps when you planned it. And often that's the thing that people don't realize, that the price of things often is just going up. I know, for example, at the moment the barrel of oil is at a very low level, but that is because of production in OPEC, particularly for geopolitical reasons, nothing to do with supply and demand. And the cost of energy is only going one way. If you take the variations, for example, in hydrocarbon production, which is just turned up at certain times, out of the equation, it's a fairly steady rise in costs as that energy becomes more and more scarce. And if you're building a house on a 50-year model, of course, you've got to take those things into account.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely as poignant as you can. That's really well said, because effectively, there's a few things. One is the last few years, I think we've seen consecutive 19% energy rises for the last, I think, 3 to 5 years. It's incredible the rate of increase in energy costs to a UK citizen. Firstly, secondly, there has been a lot of post-analysis of the last recession. And what was really interesting is at first all the economists said, well, the recession was caused by this subprime bubble, right? All this sort of mortgage malarkey going on over in the US and then spreading and popping bubbles around the globe, which led everybody into a recession. What was really interesting, I've been reading a lot more recently about this kind of post-analysis, which is saying actually all these sorts of things, they appear and they are part of the process, but everything's driven by energy. Everything is driven by energy, and actually what's happening is if you look at the price of a barrel of oil coming back out of OPEC, it almost explicitly defines the majority of global economics or economies. As it goes up, our economies go down, and vice versa. It's as simple as that. So actually, one of the best ways that you can see how your business is going to do is looking at the petrol pump as you drive past. If that is looking like the 130s, 140 pences, you're going to start to see a big knock-on effect to everyone else. If it's coming down as it is, my garage around the corner is now at 121, which is as low as I've seen it in years, and so I think we've got a good few years of major kind of boosting in terms of our economy coming up.
Indeed. And on that cheery note, we've come to the end of this week's show. But as I said earlier on, we've got a guest next week, John Draper, who's going to be talking about his passive house. So that'll be really interesting to see. I think we'll get John Kit, if you're up for it, to sit in with us during the news so he can give his comment and opinion as well.
Yeah, absolutely. That'd be ideal.
Great. So on that note, I would like to say thank you very much for watching. If you did watch, thank you for listening. If you did listen, remember our subreddit, ecotastic.reddit.com, where you can vote our stories up and down. And please give us some news. It was tough putting this week's show together. We need things to happen out there. So whether you're making the news or just finding the news for it, go and have a look at ecotastic.reddit.com. You can subscribe to us on iTunes, though I have had some reports that our podcast isn't working on iTunes. I'll try and get onto that and get that fixed. And of course, if you're watching this on YouTube, please like us. Thank you very much. And we'll see you next week. So it's goodbye from me, Robin Yellow, and
goodbye from me, Kit Knowles.